They gave Vanessa the spotlight. They left me with what no one wanted. The floor creaked beneath my boots as I stepped inside Naomi's house for the first time since the funeral. Dust clung to the window panes, muting the golden light that spilled in from the thinning afternoon. I paused just past the threshold, my coat still buttoned, fingers hesitant on the doorknob as if some part of me feared the house would reject me the way my family had. Naomi always said, "The best things don't come to the loudest voice, they come to the one who listens." I didn't realize she meant this house. The scent hit first lavender and cedar faded, but still clinging like a memory too stubborn to let go. Everything was still in place. The crocheted doilies on the armrests, the porcelain lamp with a small chip on its base. Her books, spine-worn and creased, waited silently on the shelf still organized by emotion, not alphabet. I walked into the living room, brushing my fingers along the back of her favorite chair. It felt wrong without her in it. She was the only one who ever saw me fully, who spoke to me like I had weight, like I wasn't a footnote in the Caldwell narrative. When I told her I didn't want to compete with Vanessa, she simply smiled and said, "That's fine, darling. Let her perform. You build." I swallowed hard and moved toward the hallway. I knew what I was looking for before I even opened the drawer. Her writing desk was near the window, the surface as tidy as ever. Inside the second drawer, tucked beneath a bundle of pressed lilac petals, was a cream-colored envelope with my name in her looping, cursive Eleanor. My chest tightened. The envelope felt heavier than paper ought to. I sat down and opened it slowly, as if the moment would slip through my fingers if I moved too fast. Her letter smelled faintly of rose water and ink. My eyes traced her words, one line at a time. "You never asked. That's why I left it to you." The breath left me like a sudden exhale. I reread it, unsure if I misunderstood. But there it was. Her house. Her legacy. Not because I demanded it, but because I didn't. I closed my eyes, clutching the letter. Gratitude and grief tangled in my throat. The screen door snapped open behind me. Vanessa's voice rang out like wind chimes with nails embedded in them. "Oh, you're already here!" I turned. She stood with her hands on her hips, wrapped in a designer wool coat, sunglasses still perched atop her head like a crown. "I thought you might come by," she said, scanning the room with a realtor's hunger. "Of course Dad and I were just talking about arrangements. This place is lovely, but well, it's a bit dated." "Don't you think?" I didn't answer. She moved closer, heels clicking across the hardwood floor. Her eyes landed on the envelope in my hands. "What's that? A letter?" I said quietly. She waited for more. I didn't offer it. Richard's voice arrived before he did. "Girls!" He stepped in, looking vaguely tired, vaguely disinterested, as if grief were a logistical burden, not an emotional one. He gave me a nod that could barely qualify as familial. "Vanessa will handle things. She's good at this sort of stuff. Arrangements." I asked, folding the letter and sliding it back into the envelope. "Well, the estate, the utilities selling the place. She'll manage it with Margot's help." I looked past him through the front window at the hills Naomi loved. They hadn't changed, and neither had I. "I'm not selling it." Vanessa blinked. "You don't really want to live here, do you?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I already do. Even when I sat at the table, it felt like I wasn't invited. The chairs hadn't changed, still rigid oak with deep burgundy cushions, more ornamental than comfortable. The table was set like a holiday, spread roasted vegetables glazed with rosemary oil, crusty bread nestled in linen, and a floral centerpiece so wide you had to lean to see the person opposite you. It was the kind of scene that might look warm from the outside if you didn't know better. Vanessa sat at the head of the table like she belonged there. She wore a cream blouse with flared sleeves and gold hoops that shimmered every time she tossed her hair back to laugh. "We're thinking of calling the new location Vanessa's on Vine," she said. "It's right near the theater district. Foot traffic is amazing." Richard nodded proudly. "Smart move. Theatergoers are always looking for an after-show spot." Margot chimed in with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Vanessa has an eye for branding. It's a gift. And timing," Richard added. Right after the holiday rush, you'll have people lining up down the block. I reached for my water. No one asked where I was living now. No one mentioned the structural design award I'd won last spring, or the bridge project I just finished in Gunnison. My work didn't make for charming anecdotes or aesthetic Instagram posts. Logan sat 2 seats down from me, his eyes flitting from plate to phone to wine glass. He wasn't really part of the conversation either, but the difference was he was still welcomed, like one of their own. I heard the kitchen's got one of those old-fashioned stoves, Margot said, suddenly shifting gears. Gas burners, real vintage charm. Wouldn't it be perfect for Vanessa's baking videos? I blinked. Were they seriously discussing how Naomi's kitchen could be repurposed for social media? You know, Margot went on, as if the idea had just occurred to her. Evergreen might be the ideal place for them. Logan's been talking about hiking more, and Vanessa could turn the back patio into a yoga deck. I set down my fork quietly. Naomi left it to me. Silence. Not just a pause. A stillness so heavy it pressed into the corners of the room, thick as steam. Vanessa stopped mid-sip. Richard didn't move. Margot's smile froze her fork suspended above the mashed potatoes. "She did," I repeated. There was a letter in the drawer. Signed. She made it clear. Richard cleared his throat, brushing non-existent crumbs from his shirt cuff. "Let's not dwell on things tonight. This dinner is about honoring Naomi, not divvying up property." "No one's dividing anything?" I said calmly. "I'm just stating a fact." Vanessa set her glass down with a clink. "It's just, you're never around. What would you even do with it?" "Let it collect dust." I met her eyes. "Live in it. Care for it. The way Naomi wanted." The silence returned, but it was different this time. Less shocked, more strategic. I could almost see their minds recalibrating. Naomi once told me, "If they never see your worth, stop offering discounts." I didn't understand her then. I thought silence was dignity, that shrinking myself was maturity. But tonight, I saw what she meant. They didn't just ignore me, they edited me out. I looked around the table. My name hadn't come up once. My life, my accomplishments, my grief, it was all absent. I was a placeholder, occupying a chair no one thought I earned. Margot smiled again, tighter this time. "Well, I suppose the lawyer will sort all that out." Vanessa leaned back, arms folded. "You're never home anyway. What would you do with it?" "Some people inherit homes. I inherited a battlefield." The law office smelled like old carpet and copy toner, with just a faint trace of lavender diffuser someone had tried to make inviting. It didn't work. Nothing could mask the tension clinging to the corners of the room like cobwebs that had seen too many family feuds. I sat beside a tall stack of manila folders, facing Danica Pierce, Naomi's lawyer, and now mine. She had a calm, practiced air like a woman who'd spent years navigating emotional minefields disguised as estate planning. Her silver glasses rested low on her nose, and every time she turned a page, the faint scratch of paper made me feel like a verdict was being written. Richard and Margot sat across from me. He was in a navy jacket he probably thought looked distinguished. Margot wore something beige and tight around the collar, like she was bracing herself for cold news. A junior assistant sat quietly in the corner with a laptop typing without looking up. And on the screen to my right, Vanessa's face flickered into view, smiling too wide eyes, too sharp. "Shall we begin?" Danica asked. She didn't wait for a response. She reached for the top file, flipped it open, and cleared her throat. This document dated October 9th, 2022, constitutes the final legally binding will and testament of Naomi Caldwell. It has been notarized, filed, and recorded under Colorado state law. In it, Ms. Caldwell states the following. A pause. My fingers curled slightly around the armrest of the chair. To my granddaughter, Eleanor Caldwell, I leave the entirety of my evergreen property, including all land contents and rights of access. No other party shall have claim or obligation to its maintenance or ownership. This bequeathal is final and uncontested unless challenged through formal legal channels. Silence. Then a scoff from the monitor. "Oh, come on," Vanessa said, leaning toward the screen. "That's ridiculous. It's probably just some sentimental draft. Naomi would never cut out the rest of the family like that." Danica looked up slowly. It's not a draft. It's signed, dated, and notarized. Witnessed by two legal parties, myself and Ms. Maribel Chen, paralegal at the time. The Evergreen property is now the sole legal possession of Miss Eleanor Caldwell. Richard exhaled sharply, his hands clasped. Well, I'm sure we can have a conversation privately. No need to turn this into something dramatic. There's no conversation needed, Danica said, flipping to the next tab in her binder. Unless you intend to file a formal objection, the matter is settled. However, I should warn you, this would be a hard document to challenge. Naomi's mental capacity was confirmed before signing. And unless you wish to pursue a lawsuit which could cost significant time and resources, there is nothing more to contest, Margot muttered under her breath. We'll talk to her privately. I turned to her slowly. There's nothing to talk about. The way their faces stiffened like mannequins mid-collapse told me they'd expected silence. Maybe a shy deflection. Not this. For a brief moment, I saw something flicker across Vanessa's face on the screen. Not confusion, not anger, something closer to calculation. Well, she said finally, with a tight smile. Congratulations, Ellie. You've got the keys to a fixer-upper in the middle of nowhere. Hope you enjoyed digging out raccoons from the attic. Danica didn't flinch. If you have no further questions, we can wrap this meeting. Vanessa smirked. Oh, I'm sure we'll revisit this soon enough. Enjoy it while you can. And with that, the screen went dark. I didn't move. Just stared at the empty chair where her image had been. For the first time in this whole process, I had something concrete, legal, untouched by favoritism or avoidance. I had Naomi's words backed by law. But peace was still a long way off. They moved in like they owned it. I stood there like a stranger. Evergreen looked unchanged from the road. Bare trees lined the gravel path, the house still flanked by Naomi's two weathered garden statues. But as I turned into the driveway, the scene grew louder. A U-Haul was parked out front. The door was open. Someone had left muddy footprints across the porch Naomi used to sweep every Sunday. I stepped out of my car, locking it without taking my eyes off the mess. Boxes, some labeled cafe, supplies, others. Winter wardrobe were scattered beside flower pots I remembered planting with Naomi. The wind had knocked one over. Soil spilled down the front steps. Inside, I heard movement, voices, laughing. I stepped through the door, and a wave of unfamiliarity hit me. The throw blankets were gone, replaced by thick faux fur ones in sterile white. Naomi's record player was nowhere in sight. The faint scent of her lavender spray had been smothered by vanilla-scented candles. Vanessa turned from the living room phone tucked between shoulder and ear. There you are, she chirped, waving a hand like I'd just arrived late to a brunch we'd planned. I wasn't aware you were moving in? It's temporary, she said, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Just until after the holidays. You weren't really using the house, right? I stared at her. That's not the point. Logan came in from the hallway, wearing boots indoors. His arms were full of glossy marketing boards and what looked like a countertop espresso machine. He didn't say anything, just nodded and set everything on Naomi's sideboard, which was now scratched. We thought you'd understand. Vanessa continued, undeterred. Logan needs a quiet space to test his startup stuff, and this place has the perfect vibe. Rustic, yet modern. We're even thinking of doing some Instagram shoots in the kitchen. Without asking, Vanessa shrugged. Your family. You really want it sitting empty, like some kind of shrine. Naomi wouldn't have wanted that. I clenched my jaw. That line, they used it like a golden ticket. Naomi would have wanted. Naomi would have approved. Naomi, who never once said she wanted Vanessa in this house after she passed. She left it to me, I said. Sure. But you're barely ever here. Before I could answer, Logan unrolled a sheet across the dining table. It was a mock-up menu titled Caldwell Roast, Winter Pop-Up Concept. Beneath it, a logo, a stylized evergreen tree wrapped in steam. What is this? Our holiday brand test, Logan said, finally speaking. Soft launch starts mid-December. We'll host private tastings here. In Naomi's home, in your investment, Vanessa said sweetly. You're sitting on potential Eleanor. Don't be so emotional. Emotional. That word felt like a slap. I turned and walked down the hall, each step louder than the last. Naomi's bedroom door was ajar. When I pushed it open, the breath left me. Her antique vanity had been moved to the corner, half covered by makeup bags. The window seat where Naomi used to read was buried in unopened wedding gifts. But it was the closet that made my stomach drop. Hanging from the knob was a long garment bag, satin peeking from the zipper's gap. I didn't need to open it. I knew exactly what it was. Vanessa's wedding dress, hung like a declaration in Naomi's most private space. I stood frozen air, caught in my throat. My hands curled into fists, not out of rage, but out of restraint. They hadn't just invaded. They'd rewritten the narrative, declared ownership by presence, pushed me out with smiles. I walked outside without a word. The cold hit harder now. The air sliced through my coat, but it cleared my head. The last leaf from Naomi's favorite aspen tree twisted in the wind before letting go. I stood beneath it, watching it fall. My phone buzzed. Celeste. Hey, just got off shift. How's the house? Wait, are you crying? I hadn't realized tears were sliding down my cheeks. No, I said, wiping them quickly. Not crying. A beat of silence. Then her voice softened. Are you okay? I looked back at the porch now littered with things that didn't belong. That never belonged. I breathed in once. I'm done being okay. They called it a family contribution. I called it theft, with a smile. December 23rd always had a weight to it. Not quite Christmas Eve, but enough expectation hung in the air to make it feel ceremonial. I arrived at the Caldwell home with my suitcase in one hand and a bakery box of pastries in the other. Naomi used to make pecan rolls from scratch, flaky, sticky, and never quite perfect. I didn't try to recreate hers. I brought store-bought. The symbolism would be lost on them, but it meant something to me. The driveway was full. Luggage lined the sidewalk like soldiers ready for deployment. Logan's voice floated through the winter air, directing someone to pack the snowboards better. I frowned. The SUV was almost overflowing, the back hatch wide open, and Logan's gloved hands were arranging everything with practiced ease. Margot spotted me first. Oh, Eleanor, she called, surprised, like I hadn't confirmed the trip 2 weeks ago. Didn't expect you so early. I checked my phone. It was 8:41 a.m. We said wheels up at 9. Behind her, Vanessa stepped out with a coffee in hand and a puffer coat zipped to her chin. About that? I set my suitcase down. What's going on? There's been a bit of a shift, she said breezily, the way people do when they're lying through their teeth, but hope charm will carry them through. A shift Logan's brother and his girlfriend decided to come after all, she explained. The lodge reworked the rooms. It's tight. And my room. There wasn't one left. I blinked. You're leaving without me? Margot inserted herself like a referee between awkwardness and guilt. You've had so much on your plate lately. We thought it might be nice to give you the house for the holidays. Quiet. Peaceful. I narrowed my eyes. You thought that without telling me. Vanessa gestured vaguely to the porch. We were going to call last night. Then the packing ran late. You know how it is. I glanced around. The SUV was nearly full. My absence had clearly been factored in long before this morning. Richard walked up, then looping a scarf around his neck. Ellie, this isn't a slight. It's just logistics. I looked between them. Did you use the Evergreen payment to fund this? They froze, just long enough for confirmation. Richard cleared his throat. The tax notice came out of nowhere. We were grateful you handled it. That wasn't a gift, I said. It helped us all, Vanessa chirped. And you weren't using the house full time, so you spent it on yourselves. You're overreacting, Margot said gently, as if I'd lost touch with reality. It's just a vacation. One I paid for, I reminded them. And wasn't invited to. Richard's voice dropped a register, trying for calm authority. Let's not blow this out of proportion. We'll regroup in the new year. I took a breath, but it didn't fill me. It just sat in my chest like a stone. Vanessa tapped her cupboard now. You'll have the house to yourself. Isn't that what you wanted? I almost laughed. The cruelty wasn't in the words. It was in the delivery, so casual, so rehearsed, like I should thank them for this final insult. No, I said slowly. What I wanted was to be part of this family. What I got? was an invoice. Margot looked away. Logan shut the hatch. The moment passed unacknowledged, unchallenged as always. They piled into the SUV. Logan honked once, cheerful. I stood there, suitcase still beside me, cold sinking into my boots, watching them drive off with laughter muffled behind closed windows. When the sound of tires faded, I stood on the porch for a moment longer. I let the cold settle on my skin, let the silence take root. The pastries in my hand felt absurd. I turned, opened the front door, and stepped inside. The house was quiet, but not peaceful, just empty. And in that emptiness, something cracked not loudly, but definitively. I placed the bakery box on the kitchen counter, then walked slowly to the front door again. My hand found the bolt. I turned it not in anger, not even sadness, just certainty. From the inside, I locked the door. They thought I'd beg. I asked for the paperwork instead. The last snow hadn't melted yet. The sharp cold had begun to loosen its grip on evergreen. My boots left clean tracks on the courthouse steps, each one measured, deliberate. I wasn't here to make noise. I was here to make something permanent. Danica met me with a fresh cup of coffee and a folder thicker than I expected. She slid it toward me without ceremony. This, she said, is your line in the sand. I opened it to find a template. An official notice of demand to vacate backed by property codes, occupancy statutes, and enough teeth to shred through any fantasy Vanessa had of squatting rights. She's not listed as a tenant, Danica confirmed. There's no lease, no payment history, not even a text acknowledging rent. In legal terms, she's trespassing. You are within full right to serve a 10-day notice before we escalate. I sat back, fingers curled around the warmth of the mug. I hadn't said a word yet. I didn't need to. Danica knew. Her eyes held the calm weight of someone who'd watched too many women wait for permission to protect what was theirs. I'll do it, I said finally. Today. She nodded. Make a copy of the deed first. From the county office, just to have every line ready. Outside, I texted Celeste a single sentence. It starts today. She sent back a heart emoji, and then almost immediately, after you've got this. Let me know if I need to bring wine or a fire extinguisher. The records building was as beige and bureaucratic as memory promised. A clerk behind glass asked for my ID and parcel number. Within 10 minutes, I had 3 certified copies of the deed in a yellow envelope embossed and final. Eleanor Caldwell, sole inheritor of 318 Ridgeview Lane. No one else. No shared name, no cosigner, just me. I held that envelope as I walked back to the car. It felt heavier than paper. It felt like Naomi's approval pressed into cardstock. I didn't drive straight to the house. I drove around the block first. Then I parked. I wanted the walk up to the door to mean something. The sun was low, brushing gold across the bare trees. Evergreen looked quiet. Too quiet. There were footprints near the porch, Vanessa's, probably Logan's. A set of muddy boot prints led toward the shed. They weren't expecting me. Good. I stepped onto the porch, ignoring the wreath on the door Vanessa's touch, all glitter and fake pine, and pulled the folded paper from my coat pocket. The ink was still fresh. Notice 2. Vacate. 10 days to comply. I slid it gently through the gap in the front door. It landed with a soft flap on the hardwood inside. For a second, I just stood there, listening. I didn't knock. I didn't call out. Silence was louder. I turned and walked back down the steps without a glance over my shoulder. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. Vanessa, are you really doing this? I stared at the screen thumb hovering over the keyboard. I started typing, "You left me no choice." Backspaced. Then typed again. "You knew it was mine." Deleted it. In the end, I let the silence speak for me. I locked the phone without replying. The wind picked up brushing hair across my face. I tucked the envelope under my coat, got in, and started the engine. The headlights cut through the dusk. 10 days. That's all they had. Let them spend everyone wondering what comes after. Vanessa texts back, "Are you really doing this?" Eleanor types, then deletes her reply. Silence is sent instead. They called me heartless. That's when I knew they were afraid. Vanessa's voice still rang in my ears, From our last phone exchange, brittle with performative outrage, but underneath it, I heard something else. A hesitation she couldn't quite smooth over. I hadn't spoken to her since. There was nothing left to explain, no apologies to offer. What remained was action cold and deliberate. Danica slid the final version of the legal notice across her desk like a chess piece she knew would corner the king. "We'll courier it to both addresses today. Her cafe and Naomi's property," she said, glancing up. "Want the electronic copies too?" "Yes," I replied. "I want full visibility." Danica's expression shifted. Equal parts admiration and concern. "You're not flinching anymore." "I don't have time to flinch." It was early January, and the legal office smelled faintly of old paper and bergamot. Outside, Denver's wind had a surgical sharpness. It cut through coats and illusions. When I left her office, I stopped at a small cafe near the courthouse. Not Vanessa's, just one where the quiet hummed like a friend. I sipped bitter coffee, rereading Naomi's will one more time, not because I doubted it, but because her handwriting steadied me. Even in death, she anchored me better than the living ever had. By late afternoon, Danica's paralegal confirmed the documents had been delivered and signed for at both locations. Phase 1, complete, the message read. All timestamps logged, copies filed. At home, I opened the security app on my phone. The house sat still silent beneath the bare-limbed oaks Naomi once planted herself. Then, at 1:07 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Celeste had sent a screenshot from a neighborhood gossip thread. Vanessa Caldwell snapped today. Screamed at a barista. Something about betrayal and siblings. The image showed Vanessa, red-faced mid-sentence, with two employees looking stunned behind the counter. Her mask had slipped. I tapped into the live feed from the porch camera. Logan appeared moments later, dragging a heavy plastic bin marked X Mass Decor down the steps. The espresso machine had already disappeared from the kitchen window. He paused, glancing back at the door, then loaded the bin into their car without a word. No eye contact. No pride. At 3:16 p.m., Danica forwarded a voicemail from Richard. "I don't know what Eleanor thinks she's doing, but this isn't how family handles things," he said. "You tell her she's making a mistake." I played it twice. On the third listen, I caught it. The edge in his tone wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear of what might come next, of what I was capable of if I stayed silent and calculated. By dusk, Vanessa returned home alone. Her gait was stiff, her jaw clenched so tightly it trembled. She stormed up the walkway, phone in hand, mouthing something to whoever was on the other end of the line. The camera caught it all. Every broken step. She glanced up, saw the envelope pinned to the door fluttering like a ghost. Her eyes narrowed, and she yanked it free. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. She already knew what it said. Then she stopped mid-step, phone still at her ear. "I told you she wouldn't." She barked, her voice barely muffled. But she did. She's serious. She's actually serious. I watched her turn away, a figure shrinking in a frame she once tried to own. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I exhaled. The war hadn't begun with a scream. It started with a whisper wrapped in legal ink. And they finally heard it. Back inside Naomi's house, I sat down at the kitchen table where the worn wood still bore faint heat marks from her old teapot. I rested my elbows there, the envelope copies spread like tarot cards before me. Each one was a strike, not of vengeance, but of clarity. Naomi had told me once, over a cracked mug of peppermint tea, "You don't raise your voice to warn someone, you raise it to finish the sentence." I never forgot it. Back then, I thought she meant it as a metaphor. Now I realized she had been teaching me how to survive. The mail slot clinked. Junk, probably, but it startled me anyway. I stood grounding myself before the adrenaline could make my hands tremble. I wasn't afraid, I just hadn't yet adjusted to being the one in control. Another message from Celeste. "Should I be worried if Vanessa starts stress-baking tiramisu again?" I smiled briefly, then replied, "Only if she starts selling it at 50% off. That's when she knows she's lost." Outside, the wind picked up. A snowflake brushed the window and melted instantly. I leaned back, let the quiet in again. They weren't yelling anymore. They were listening. and I hadn't raised my voice once. Danica emails, want to proceed with phase 2. Eleanor replies, yes. Quietly. They tried to corner me. I built a wall, then watched them run into it. The court clerk's office smelled faintly of toner and worn-out carpet, the air a mixture of legal dust and quiet urgency. Danica's heels echoed beside mine as we walked past a bulletin board littered with foreclosure notices and small claims instructions. In her hand, a manila folder thick with printouts and certified forms. In mine, a quiet conviction I hadn't known I was capable of just a few weeks ago. I drafted the affidavit of ownership signed and notarized. We're filing for a motion to evict unauthorized occupants. Danica said, her voice calm, almost clinical. Once we file, we post. Then we wait. I nodded, gripping the folder tighter. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us, their sterile glow matching the tone of what we were about to do. A man ahead of us argued with a clerk about a parking dispute. It made the silence between Danica and me feel sharper, like the pause before a gavel lands. The clerk barely looked up as she accepted the papers. Danica spoke in her professional lilt, referencing codes and procedures. The woman stamped them briskly twice. Finality in ink. You'll get a docket number within 3 business days, she said. I stood still for a moment longer, letting the sound of the stamp echo inside me. Then we walked out. I didn't need to say anything. The wall was up now, legal documented and unshakable. Outside, winter clung to the pavement in icy streaks. I could see Naomi's house in my mind, even though it was miles away, its wraparound porch, the sagging wind chime, the window I used to press my face against as a child. That house had never been about square footage. It had been sanctuary, until they moved in like they owned it. Danica handed me the extra copies. You want to do the posting yourself? Yes, I replied, slipping them into my coat. They'll take it more seriously, coming from me. By the time I got to Evergreen, the sky was gray enough to feel like dusk, though it was barely noon. The air smelled like pine and frozen soil. I walked up the porch steps slowly, my boots thudding against the old wood. Vanessa had replaced Naomi's doormat with one that said, "Hello, gorgeous." The irony almost made me laugh. I unfolded the eviction notice, smoothed its corners, and taped it cleanly to the front door, centered straight, unignorable. My breath fogged the glass. I paused, letting the chill bite at my cheeks, then stepped back to look at it. The paper fluttered slightly in the wind, but its words were unshakable. Meanwhile, across town, Logan had just opened the cafe when he spotted the envelope from the clerk's office addressed to Vanessa. He sliced it open without ceremony, his brow tightening as he read. The notice wasn't just formal, it was final. He dialed her number and muttered, "You need to get over here now." Vanessa showed up 30 minutes later, red coat flaring like a warning sign. I watched from the house camera feed sitting in the warmth of Danica's office. Vanessa didn't even greet her staff. She barreled into the back room, slammed the office door, and minutes later stormed back out with her phone pressed to her ear. Richard's voice was low, but urgent when I answered his call. "Eleanor, do you understand what you're doing? This could go public. It's not a good look for anyone." I kept my voice even. It should have never been private. There was a beat of silence, then a sigh. "You've made your point. I haven't yet," I said, "but I will." Back at Evergreen, Vanessa returned that evening. Dusk had folded fully into night. A porch light buzzed to life above her. She stood before the door reading the notice, then reading it again as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less humiliating. And then rage. She yanked it off, crumpled it, and hurled it into the bushes. She turned only to freeze as the camera caught her flushed face in perfect detail. She stared directly into the lens, eyes full of fury and disbelief. And I was already watching. Vanessa rips the eviction notice off the front door. The camera captures everything. They thought I'd fold. Instead, I filed. The hallway of the local courthouse was colder than I expected, even for January. My boots tapped softly against the tile as I held the thick envelope of Vanessa's complaint, her official, bold-faced lie. I took a seat by the frosted window, the light weak and sterile, like the justice system, trying to play God under fluorescent bulbs. Inside that envelope was a declaration Vanessa had filed with the court stating that Naomi had verbally promised her the right to use Evergreen during family holiday gatherings. I read every sentence 3 times searching for truth. There wasn't any. It was fiction wrapped in legal phrasing, a script born of desperation. But that didn't mean it couldn't do damage. Danica met me in the clerk's office shortly after I arrived, her heels quiet, her expression unreadable. "She's banking on the court, taking her word as sentiment," Danica said, flipping through the pages. "Unfortunately, that sometimes works. She's using the holidays like a shield," I replied, watching a bailiff walk past. "Like it makes everything sacred and untouchable." Danica tucked the folder under her arm. "It makes her look like the victim. That's the real play here." Back at the cabin, I laid the complaint on my kitchen table. Snow had begun to fall outside the window, making everything feel too still. I thought of Naomi, her handwriting on that letter, the way she folded her recipes precisely into thirds, the silence she wore like armor. She wouldn't have handed promises over tea. She would have left records, details, witnesses, anything but this ghost of a claim. I made tea but didn't drink it. Instead, I reread the complaint. Vanessa had even attached a supposed email thread, one she claimed Naomi had sent, confirming her blessing to use Evergreen as a seasonal retreat. The formatting was wrong. The time zone was off. And the email signature looked clipped from a different platform. But the part that hit me hardest was the idea that she thought I wouldn't notice. My phone lit up with a message from Derek. "Still got that folder?" I paused. He meant the manila folder from 2 years ago, the one with Vanessa's old lease agreements, her forged internship letter, the email chain where she altered timestamps on a resume. Naomi had asked me to hold on to it just in case. At the time, I thought she was being paranoid. Now, I saw it differently. Danica called 30 minutes later, her voice sharp with focus. We pulled the metadata on the email. "Naomi supposedly sent it November 25th last year." "Yes," I said, already feeling the catch in my throat. "Naomi passed away. November 3rd. Silence. "She couldn't have sent it," Danica continued, "and the file timestamp doesn't match the device Naomi used for any of her correspondence. This was created after the fact on a different operating system." I closed my eyes. Forgery. Vanessa had gone from subtle manipulation to blatant criminality. And the audacity, the sheer audacity to fake something and staple it to Naomi's name. "She's unraveling," I murmured. Danica hesitated. "We can file for perjury. Let me know." I looked around the cabin, the air thinner now, as if the house itself had heard. There was a fury in my chest, but it wasn't hot. It was cold, calculated, the kind of rage that sharpens instead of blinds. "No," I said slowly. "Let her run with it." "You sure?" "Yes. Let her get comfortable." The next morning, I woke before sunrise. My breath clouded in the chill of the cabin as I moved toward the stack of legal folders on the counter. The wood groaned under my weight as I leaned forward, reviewing every note Danica had scribbled in the margins. Each phrase was sharp technical final terms like burden of proof and bad faith affidavit marked in blue ink. I picked up the forged email again this time, holding it to the light as if it might suddenly confess its own deceit. The digital lie Vanessa had conjured carried more than just legal weight. It was emotional assault. It wasn't just about property. It was about erasure. I called Celeste, but let the phone ring out. I couldn't yet say what I felt, not without unraveling something I still needed tightly wound. Instead, I stepped outside into the snow and watched the pine trees sway with the wind, silent, heavy, and honest. By noon, Danica texted me a scanned copy of Vanessa's original complaint with red annotations. In the margins, she had circled timelines, emphasized inconsistencies, and underlined one thing 3 times: intentional misrepresentation. At the bottom, she'd written, "Hold this," and I would. I'd hold it like a stone in my hand, wait until the timing turned it into a weapon. Vanessa had mistaken my stillness for surrender. That was her first mistake. Letting her feel safe again would be her second. "Eleanor, let's not expose it yet. Let her get comfortable." They wanted war. I gave them receipts. The storm outside Danica's office blurred the windows into a soft gray haze, muting the world like a held breath. Inside, everything was still except for the manila folder in my lap, thick enough to buckle slightly at the corners. I hadn't touched it in weeks, but it had never left my mind. Danica looked up from her desk when I walked in, snow melting off my coat, my boots leaving a trail of water against the hardwood. I didn't speak. I simply walked forward and placed the folder between us like a card flipped face up in a poker game. She opened it slowly, brow furrowing as she flipped through the first few pages. Physical letters, bank transactions, metadata, screenshots, timestamps from the front door camera. Eleanor, this is... She stopped. This is methodical. I didn't know what I was collecting at first, I said quietly. I just knew I had to keep something. I was tired of feeling like I'd imagined the whole thing. Danica pulled out the printed email trail from Logan's shared cafe system. Vanessa's digital fingerprints were all over it, bulk orders for renovations labeled under Evergreen Expansion, dated 2 weeks before Naomi's funeral. Premeditation, she muttered. They were moving in before Naomi's body was cold. I sat down, fingers wrapped around the warmth of a mug she handed me. The documents looked so small from here, but each page carried weight, 1,000 silences, gaslights, dismissals, and half-smiles that had never quite sat right. Danica was already pulling out highlighters and Post-its, building a color-coded case on her desk like an architect sketching a battle plan. You've got screenshots of Vanessa joking about manipulating your dad, voicemail transcripts, kitchen camera footage of Logan moving in equipment. This isn't a defense. This is a pattern. She flipped to a printed transcript and tapped it. This one here. Vanessa on speakerphone saying, "It's not stealing if she doesn't fight. That'll be your closing argument." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a message from Celeste. I hadn't told her I was at the law office, but she knew. "Don't forget the Christmas recording," her text read. "The one from the hallway. Check your voice memos." My stomach flipped. I had forgotten almost. That Christmas Eve, just before they left without me, I'd gone upstairs to grab my coat. I'd left my phone on the railing, accidentally recording. When I came back, I'd caught Vanessa and Margot laughing below, mocking my quiet little charity project of a life. Danica leaned in as I played it. The sound wasn't perfect, but it was clear. Vanessa. She doesn't even know what's hers. She never did. Then Margot. That's why it's so easy. Danica closed the folder gently. Her voice was almost reverent. "Eleanor, this isn't a defense. This is a weapon." The snow outside thickened. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled not from the clouds, but from the ground shifting beneath someone who thought it would always hold. She reached for her tablet and opened her calendar. Time for a hearing. I didn't hesitate. Let's give them a date they'll remember. Danica smiled, but it wasn't amusement. It was something colder. Respect, perhaps, or anticipation. We'll draft the motion by end of day. By tomorrow, their attorney will get the summons. She glanced at the board she'd filled behind her desk, red string dates, emails, pinned like crime scene details. This whole thing's been a paper war. They've been throwing paper at you hoping you'd drown. But you turned it into bricks. She stood stretching. We'll file a formal request for a restraining clause to prevent future occupancy without express written permission. Will it hold? It'll do more than hold. It'll trap them where they thought they'd thrive. On the way home, I drove slower than usual. The roads were slick, but I didn't mind the stillness. For the first time in months, the tension in my chest had shifted from fear to clarity. I wasn't merely reacting, I was composing. Every lie they'd fed me had become a line in a symphony they didn't know they were starring in. Back at the cabin, I lit a fire and sat with the folder again. Not to reread, but to absorb. To feel the pulse of what I had built, not out of revenge, but necessity. They thought I'd collapse. I archived everything. And now the paper trail would speak. Louder than they ever had. They smiled in court like it was a formality. I brought the storm in my file. Courtroom 3A was colder than I expected. Not because of the stone or the air conditioning, but because of who was sitting across from me. Vanessa in her tailored beige coat, Richard beside her like a faded statue of what a father should be. Logan sat 2 rows back, his arms slung casually over the bench, but his eyes never stopped scanning me. Watching, calculating. Danica whispered, "Keep your eyes forward. Let the paperwork speak." Judge Simmons entered promptly at 9 black robes sweeping past the clerk's desk. The room shifted. Even Vanessa straightened. "This is a preliminary hearing in the matter of Caldwell v. Ellison et al. Regarding the occupancy of the property located at 14 Spruce Hollow Road," the judge began. "We'll review documentation, establish ownership, and determine the scope of temporary injunctive relief." Danica stood first, placing the thick folder on the table with an audible thud. "Your Honor, my client, Miss Eleanor Caldwell, is the sole legal owner of the property. We have the original will, the notarized deed, transfer, and documentation of unauthorized occupation." I didn't speak. I didn't blink. I watched Vanessa's face instead. The corners of her mouth twitched barely. Judge Simmons adjusted his glasses and turned to Vanessa's side. "Ms. Caldwell, have you ever made payments to reside at the property in question? Rent, utilities, lease agreements of any kind?" Vanessa stood, chin slightly lifted. "It wasn't like that. It was understood. We're family. Naomi would have wanted." The judge raised a hand. "Please answer directly. Have you made payments?" She hesitated. "No." Richard leaned toward the microphone. "Your Honor, if I may, my mother's wishes were never to isolate the family. We were under the impression that arrangements would be fluid." Danica didn't even glance at them. "Intentions are not ownership. We have documentation showing Vanessa began moving in weeks before Naomi's funeral. My client was not notified, consulted, nor did she provide consent." Simmons glanced down at the folder Danica had opened. The highlighted sections, dates, and witness statements were organized like a map of premeditated invasion. "Mr. Caldwell, were you aware your daughter was setting up commercial-grade appliances at the residence?" Richard blinked. "I may have known." "It was temporary? No permit filings for commercial use?" "Exist," Danica added quietly. The judge exhaled slowly, clearly unimpressed. Judge Simmons turned a page in Danica's submission, then another. "These timestamps from the interior camera. They confirm the installation timeline." "Yes, Your Honor," Danica replied. "All metadata verified by an independent technician. We're not alleging confusion. We're establishing trespass." He sat back, gaze, flicking between both sides. "This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a trespass." Vanessa's lips parted like she wanted to speak again, but no words came. Her mask cracked. Richard's hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. A few spectators in the back, older residents of Evergreen, perhaps shifted in their seats. Whispers began, quickly hushed by the clerk. Danica nodded respectfully. "We're requesting temporary injunction barring the defendants from re-entering until the matter is formally resolved." Judge Simmons tapped his pen. "I'll issue a 14-day temporary order. Full hearing to follow. You'll be notified of the court date." The gavel didn't fall, but the judgment was already felt. Outside, as I gathered my coat and papers, I felt their stares burn through the glass doors. Vanessa caught up just as I stepped into the corridor. Her voice was a hiss. "You'll regret doing this publicly." I turned slowly. "It's not public enough yet." She flinched, not because of volume, but because of the certainty in my voice. Danica caught up to me, her heels tapping sharp against the marble as we walked toward the exit. "You handled that beautifully," she said, flipping open her phone to check court filings. "Simmons isn't easily swayed, but we gave him structure. He respects that." "I didn't need him to like me," I murmured. "Just to read. You think they'll comply with the order?" "They won't," I replied. "They'll regroup. Try to frame it as me tearing the family apart. Let them. The more noise they make, the more you look like the adult in the room." By the time we reached the parking lot, snow had begun to fall, thick, heavy flakes that blurred the courthouse columns behind us. I paused beside my car, watching them dissolve against the windshield. Inside the warm vehicle, I checked my phone. A message from Celeste. "Heard it went your way. Proud of you." I didn't respond. Not yet. I wasn't ready to mark this as a win. This wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was beginning to lead. They built a story. I broke it with their own words. March. Sunlight poured through the blinds of Judge Simmons's chambers, slicing the air into angled lines that felt more like interrogation beams than warmth. I sat still, spine-straight hands folded over a single manila folder. Vanessa across the table didn't meet my eyes. She was dressed too carefully, her smile too rehearsed. Richard sat beside her, adjusting his tie every few minutes, as if decorum could erase deception. "Let's begin," Judge Simmons said. Settling into his chair, his voice carried the weight of already knowing something wasn't right. Danica stood first, sliding documents forward. "Your Honor, in response to the verbal occupancy claim made by the defendants, we've submitted additional documentation, specifically metadata analysis, on a series of communications purported to originate from the deceased Naomi Caldwell." Vanessa's brows twitched. Richard's jaw tightened. "These emails," Danica continued, "were submitted to the court last month to support the claim of holiday permission. However, the attached data logs suggest the files were created posthumously 2 days after Naomi's recorded time of death." Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. "We also have a recording," Danica added. "If the court would permit." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Danica tapped her tablet. From the courtroom, speakers came the unmistakable sound of Vanessa's voice laughing. "I mean, Eleanor barely visits. She's like a houseplant Naomi forgot to water." More laughter distant, probably from Logan. "By the time she notices we moved in, we'll have the place halfway converted." The room went still. Danica waited before adding that recording was captured last Christmas Eve. "No knowledge, consent, or participation from my client. It was recovered from a voicemail sent in error." Vanessa shot to her feet. "This is out of context." Judge Simmons raised an eyebrow. "Then sit and provide that context when it's your turn." Celeste, seated quietly in the back, nodded at me just once. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The evidence did the speaking. Danica returned to the document pile. "Your Honor, attached are the property camera logs, screenshots of messages exchanged between Mr. Logan Ellison and a private contractor referencing kitchen installations and Naomi's notarized statement regarding sole ownership." The judge flipped through, the stacked lips tightening. "This," he said slowly, "isn't a simple familial disagreement. It's a constructed misrepresentation." Richard leaned forward. "Your Honor, I believe this has spiraled out of proportion. My daughter was under the impression." "Which daughter?" Judge Simmons interjected, sharp as steel. "Because one came with a will, timestamps, legal standing, and restraint. The other came with forged emails and laughter caught on tape." The courtroom held its breath. Vanessa, still standing, paled. Danica added calmly, "We respectfully request sanctions for submission of false documents and ask that the court advise the defendants of their rights. This is approaching criminal territory." Judge Simmons looked directly at Vanessa. "Ms. Caldwell, you submitted false evidence. I strongly suggest you retain counsel for yourself." Immediately, a ripple of gasps swept the benches. A clerk's pen dropped unnoticed. Vanessa turned red, then white. She spun on her heel and bolted through the courtroom doors. Her heels struck the floor like slaps. Richard followed after a tense pause, muttering, "We'll see about this, though," to whom it wasn't clear. Logan remained frozen in his seat. When his father glanced back, it wasn't at Vanessa, but at him. And the look wasn't disappointment. It was fury. I stayed seated until the judge adjourned and the gavel fell. The air was thick with whispers, no longer about me, but about her. I walked out slowly, letting the gravity of truth trail behind me like a second shadow. Outside, the wind had picked up. Celeste met me on the courthouse steps, a paper cup of coffee in hand. "Did you breathe during that?" Because I didn't. "I did," I replied. "Every second." She handed me the cup. "It's shifting. You feel it." I nodded. The shift wasn't just legal, it was personal. For so long, I'd been the afterthought, the one whose silence was taken for weakness. Now every lie Vanessa had wrapped herself in was unraveling in full view. Danica joined us, her eyes still on the closing courthouse doors. Next step is the asset audit. If they use the property for profit, we can file for restitution. I sipped the coffee. Let's finish what they started. Behind us, a reporter waited by the curb camera slung at his side. For once, I didn't turn away. Let them see. Let the world watch the truth, plain and legal, take its rightful seat. They stood on legacy. Turns out it was a trap door. The first sign was the silence. Not the kind I'd mastered, but the kind that surrounded Vanessa's cafe that Monday morning, where there used to be a line stretching down the block. Mothers with strollers, remote workers with laptops, influencers with ring lights. Now there were 3 people inside. One reading the paper, one stirring a cup slowly, and one, Vanessa, pacing behind the counter like a lion in a glass cage. I watched from across the street inside Celeste's car, the engine off. "You sure you want to see this?" she asked. "Yes," I whispered. "I need to." The headline on the local paper read, "Eviction Fraud Allegations. Rock Popular Cafe." Beneath it, a photo of the eviction notice Vanessa had torn from Naomi's door. It wasn't a hit piece. It was careful, neutral. But it didn't have to be sensational. The truth did the work. Inside, Vanessa snatched the paper from the customer's hand. He stood and left without a word. Celeste exhaled. This town doesn't yell. It just pulls back. The silence outside mirrored the cold detachment I'd learned to live with. But for once, it wasn't mine to bear. Later that afternoon, Logan stood at the edge of the cafe's back hallway, suitcase by his side. His face was pale but determined. "You're just going to walk out," Vanessa hissed. "I asked you," he said quietly. "If any of it was true, you lied to my face. I protected us." "No," Logan replied, his voice calm. "You protected your pride and dragged me into something I never signed for." He pulled a folder from his satchel and placed it on the counter. "Bank statements. I've already signed the release. I'm no longer on the joint account." Vanessa's jaw clenched, but she didn't chase after him. She stood frozen as Logan walked out, his figure growing smaller until he disappeared around the block. Inside the cafe, an espresso machine sputtered once and fell silent. From my phone, a ping came through. Another anonymous message. Another stranger. "Thank you for doing what the rest of us were too afraid to." I stared at it, unsure what to say. These weren't just messages. They were echoes of all the things no one ever said to me before. They were acknowledgement, proof that silence could be loud if wielded right. That evening, I returned to Naomi's cabin. The fireplace crackled softly, its warmth the only sound. Celeste had dropped me off and returned to town, but not before squeezing my hand with a smile that didn't need words. The quiet here was different. It didn't weigh down, it held. Like a memory you didn't want to let go of. I curled up with the notebook Naomi once gifted me. The pages were half-filled, her neat cursive peppered between my own messy scribbles. I paused on the final page. She'd written the one I'd read a dozen times but never aloud. "If silence was your weapon," she wrote, "make sure they hear it when it breaks." The phone buzzed again. Danica's text lit up the screen. "Judge-approved full title clearance. It's officially yours, Eleanor." I stared at the words. Simple, factual, monumental. I didn't reply right away. I just walked over to the window and looked out at the trees stripped bare from winter's touch, standing stubborn against the wind. For the first time in years, I felt speechless. Not from fear, but from the weight of something that finally felt like peace. The next morning, Vanessa stood behind the counter alone. One barista had quit. The other never showed. She wore the same blouse from yesterday. Sleeves creased, eyes shadowed. Her phone buzzed repeatedly on the pastry case, but she didn't answer. From the corner table, a reporter sat watching. He didn't take notes. He didn't need to. The emptiness around her was the only quote he needed. I didn't feel triumphant watching her crumble. I felt still, like I'd arrived at the end of a long corridor and could finally close the door behind me. Vanessa tried to reach Richard that afternoon. He didn't pick up. According to Celeste, he'd left town early, avoiding the spectacle his daughter had become. His silence for once served someone else's story. As I sat at the cabin that night, the snow began to fall slow, heavy flakes blanketing the porch where Naomi once taught me how to prune lavender. The land, the quiet, the legacy. They were mine now, not because I shouted the loudest, but because I listened long enough to know when to speak and when to let silence finish the sentence. They took everything loud. I rebuilt everything quiet. The lake welcomed me back without ceremony. No confetti, no applause. Just the soft hush of spring wind rustling the newly blossomed trees and the steady lapping of water against the worn dock. Naomi used to say, "The lake doesn't boast. It reflects." I hadn't understood it then, but I did now. Lake Naomi in early April held a kind of peace I hadn't tasted in years. The cabin sat gently nestled in the woods, its roof newly repaired, its porch swing restored. Derek had insisted on fixing it himself. "Naomi would have thrown a hammer at me if I didn't," he joked as he tightened the bolts. The gesture was simple, but it clung to my ribs. Celeste arrived in the late afternoon, a thermos of mint tea in her hand and that unshakable calm in her eyes. We sat on the porch swing together, wrapped in blankets, feet rocking us slowly. She didn't ask for updates, didn't prod for court stories or reactions. She simply poured the tea, handed me a mug, and said justice was quiet, but whole. I looked out over the lake and let that settle. We didn't speak for a while, and that silence held more meaning than most conversations ever did. It was the kind of stillness Naomi loved, the kind that forced the world to slow down just enough for you to catch up with your breath. Later, Celeste wandered inside to explore the changes. I remained outside, feeling the way the wood slats creaked beneath me, familiar as an old lullaby. My fingers grazed the armrest of the swing, remembering how Naomi would sit here every Sunday with a book she never seemed to finish. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to rush the pleasure of it. A neighbor passed by with his golden retriever, paused by the fence line, and tipped his hat. "Place is looking like itself again," he said. "Your grandmother always said this cabin would come back to the right hands." He smiled, nodded once, and walked on. I wanted to call Naomi in that moment to tell her he was right, but I settled for whispering it to the wind, hoping maybe the trees would carry it further. Inside, I found Celeste curled up with a photo album. She looked up. "You ready to let it all go?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I meant letting go of the pain, the fight, or the expectation to keep proving I belonged. Maybe it was all of them. Or maybe it was just the exhaustion, finally leaving my bones. Derek dropped by the next day to drop off a fresh coat of paint for the back porch. "Still owe Naomi for that fishing trip she bailed me out of," he teased, though the softness in his voice told me he was really just checking in. We worked side by side for a while. No heavy talk, just the rhythm of brush strokes, and the occasional story from when I was 10. And Naomi caught me sneaking cookies into the boat. By the time he left, the porch gleamed and my hands smelled of cedar and second chances. The mail came in the early evening. A single envelope, cream-colored, with the seal of the probate office in the corner. I opened it slowly. Inside was a simple line, notice of final disposition. No further contest filed. Estate closed. I stared at the letter, then stepped out onto the porch. The lake shimmered gold in the fading light. It was over. Truly over. Vanessa wouldn't fight anymore. The silence wasn't a truce. It was surrender. Not the kind declared, but the kind accepted. And oddly, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like balance. Like the weight of Naomi's legacy had finally settled into my hands without trembling. Celeste came out standing beside me, watching the light skip across the water. "You know," she said, "she'd be proud of how you never made this ugly. You made it whole." I didn't answer right away. My voice was somewhere deep under layers of memory and restraint. But eventually I said I didn't win by being louder. I won by listening. And remembering. Naomi's words drifted back. "The lake doesn't boast. It reflects." The surface of the water mirrored the sky just as I'd started to mirror the parts of Naomi I missed most. Her steadiness, her silence, her unwavering spine. This wasn't the house I fought for. This was the home I had to grow into. And I had. The wind picked up gentle and warm. The swing creaked beside me, not from wear, but from invitation. I sat. And for once, I didn't need to say a word. They once erased me with silence. I answered with a signature. The sunrise broke softly over the lake, its gold bleeding into the edges of the trees, like a secret finally being told. The porch creaked beneath my slippers as I leaned into the chilled October air, the journal heavy in my lap, not because of its weight, but because of what it was about to hold. I had flipped through the old college folder the night before. Nestled between overdue library receipts and worn pages of class notes was Naomi's last letter. Its edges frayed, but the ink hadn't faded. She'd written, "You never asked." That's why I left it to you. Today, I would answer not out of grief, not even love, but out of something stronger, understanding. I uncapped the pen and began. Dear Naomi, I didn't fight for the house. I fought for your truth. The words came easier than I expected. Not angry, not performative, just full. I was never meant to out-yell them. I was meant to outlast them. You knew that. You always knew. The sun climbed higher, warming my knees. Somewhere in the kitchen behind me, the kettle began to hum. Derek's car had arrived earlier. I'd heard the gravel shift, but he hadn't come out yet. Maybe he sensed I needed this moment alone. I wrote about the first day I saw Vanessa in the house, already hanging her wedding dress like the walls belonged to her dreams. I wrote about the locked cabinets, the emptied bank account, the Christmas they left me behind. I wrote about the silence, how it had bruised more than any insult ever could, but also how I had learned to wield it. Then I folded the letter, not to mail, not to show, just to keep. A ribbon of past and present sealed between paper and ink. I slipped it into the folder and closed the journal with a sigh. My phone buzzed. A text from Celeste. You coming to the lake? Later, I typed back. Already here. The door creaked open behind me and Derek appeared, 2 mugs in hand. He didn't say anything, just passed me the tea and settled beside me on the swing. The silence we shared wasn't heavy. It was whole. We sipped and rocked the boards beneath us, shifting softly, like memory finding its place. After a long while, I whispered not to him, but to the sky. She tried to lock me out. I built my own door. To those reading my story, thank you. You followed me through silent shadows and soft victories. I never raised my voice, but I learned to raise my standards. If you've ever felt erased in your own family, know this. Your quiet doesn't mean you're weak. I hope my journey reminded you that calm isn't surrender, it's control. Stand with me, not just because I reclaimed a house, but because I reclaimed my voice. Leave me a comment. What would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet too? Or would you have shouted? Either way, I want to know I wasn't alone.